I then consequently followed that trend to go even to smaller and smaller companies. I then started my own company, a startup in 2020 when I started my own business, which, it's now 4 years ago when I became much more mindful and attentive to also my mental health, because that's an environment where someone with my traits or attitude of performance driven and outcome orientation can overly easily go into a burnout.
Can you look back to any particular events or anything that maybe, happened around that time where you suddenly became seeking a bit of attention, or was it something that was always there, do you think, or what was the catalyst for that, do you think?
That I would not want to be the person at 80 to have that big regret. So I knew I want this. And then what also helped was the kind of realization that the ambition I have for the company that I last worked for, this large global professional coffee machine manufacturer, I knew that basically I had bigger ambition for a company, what we could do with digitization.
Hello, and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest. Hello and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I'm delighted that Patrick Koller has joined me in the studio today. Patrick, welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. Pleasure to be with you today.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing your story today. We always start with the audience getting to know our guest a little bit better. So please tell us a little bit about you and your current focus.
Right. As you can probably recognize from the pictures behind me, I have two young kids, a young daughter, 6 years old, turning 7 in a few months, and a boy, 4, turning 5 in just 2 weeks. I play the cello. I'm very energetic, outdoor sports driven. I'm passionate about kite surfing, mountain biking, snowboarding. I recently picked up free diving as of last year, which I quite enjoy. And from a professional side, I've always been very interested in technology and innovation. That's where I started my career back in 2005 in telecommunications space, where I had the opportunity to develop IPTV back then as a personalization recommendation TV, as most of the audience would probably know today from Netflix account. So that was the kind of stuff that I first was engaged with. Then I later learned the value drivers by leading a large turnaround, the business transformation project for a large big tech company. I then moved on to a private equity owned company where I was tasked to basically bring their adequated coffee and vending machines into the 21st century through technology and innovation. And then I joined a family-owned professional coffee machine manufacturer, global coffee machine manufacturer, as a CMO and Chief Product and Chief Innovation Officer. Where among the many responsibilities, one was to basically build a B2B SaaS offering with IoT and digital twin, as well as to really transforming the company from a box-moving company to more a customer-oriented solution provider. And I then consequently followed that trend to go even to smaller and smaller companies. I then started my own company, a startup in 2020, which is Matchspace Music, a digital platform that connects music learners with music instructors and also helps musicians with all the admin stuff that go around with teaching music. So that's where my current focus is, and most likely going to be for the coming years ahead.
Excellent. Thank you. And there's so much richness in there, which I'm looking forward to exploring with you. The thing that's got my curiosity, which I'm sure some of the audience would be as well, is what is freediving?
Freediving is basically diving without a tank. As you just take the oxygen with your lungs and then you basically go as far as you can. And
how far have you gone so far?
So far, just a few centimeters short of 40 meters.
Wow.
Yeah.
That scares me to death. But we're already understanding a bit about yourself and your adventurous side. So that's great. So thank you for that introduction, Patrick. And let's go back to where it all started. So again, the base of this show is the premise being that lots of successful leaders out there, are shaped particularly in their early career and how they show up as leaders by what happened to them in their earliest systems that they're exposed to, whether that's family system, education system, first work system. So what about you? Take us back to how you were shaped as a leader back then.
Well, now being a parent myself, I recognize the importance of the first, I'd say 6-7 years, how much that shapes one as a person. So I believe I've certainly also been shaped by my early childhood experiences, which in just large degree was sports. I was very active in sports, also on competitive level. That it was something that has always driven me. I was very much performance-oriented, outcome-driven, had really this mental focus and game day attitude, which I believe also helped me a lot in a business context. On the other hand, I was probably also, I kind of understood back then, less so today, that basically I was more seeking performance and achievements, basically as a means to getting attention. So I believe that has certainly shaped me to a large degree, probably to this day still. But I've started to recognize kind of what drives me and what I'm kind of deciding for myself, what I want to be driven by going forward.
Great. And who were your role models back then? So if you think about you as either a sort of child or a teenager, what role models do you have around you?
Yeah, I think, well, in my earlier teens, it was really kind of the big tennis stars. So it was Boris Becker, where some friends told me have some sort of resemblance. A good friend of mine, he's Swiss Chinese. He was then basically Zhang was his idol. So we identified a lot with tennis players as we played tennis back then. From a business perspective, back then it was kind of too far away. And then kind of business idols, I only took on as some source of inspiration way later, when I also got into my own career, mid-20s, early 30s.
And we may come to this later, it might be a link, but can you look back to any particular events or anything that maybe, happened around that time where you suddenly became seeking a bit of attention, or was it something that was always there, do you think, or what was the catalyst for that, do you think?
Well, I'm convinced the early child experiences, in particular the first 6-7 years maybe, are really like very deeply ingrained in someone. And that, I believe, has also shaped me in the choices I made as a career, as a professional, the way I led teams, the way I kind of drove myself. I mentioned I was very performance oriented, so I had, I've always had big ambitions. Also helped me to kind of, race through the ranks and progressed in my career. But the flip side of that was also that at time, I would kind of also easily go over my own limits. So I had no problem to really just pile through, work throughout at times throughout, really late evening hours or throughout the night to get something accomplished. And in my early career days, I didn't have the attentiveness or the mindfulness to actually recognize that not everyone is driven the way I'm driven. And that was certainly something that, that's kind of, if you will, the flip side of that really performance and outcome orientation.
Sure. And what's interesting, I'm sure you can tell us a bit more, is particularly when you were in your 20s, there was less, I guess, acceptance or even knowledge or understanding around mental well-being, which obviously can be affected by driving yourself that hard and maybe trying to take on too much and be resourceful yourself. So can you remember when was the first time that maybe you had some recognition in those earlier years as a leader where maybe you were starting to take on too much and it was affecting you mentally?
Well, luckily for myself, I was never at the point where I was close to burnout. However, my earlier experience as a leader was in my early days at a big, large tech company where eventually a young team member, she was an intern, she came forward to my boss and basically complained that that I was too demanding, had too high expectations, and also the pace I kind of applied was too stressful for her. So that was kind of the first knock, if you will, but also reflection that I have to be more attentive and mindful that everyone's different.
And that's a really interesting point you raised there. I'm sure the audience would like to know that even when we receive that feedback as a leader, a lot of the time we can say, well, it's not me, it's her, and sometimes it can be. I believe it's about how we both show up in that kind of relationship. So what was it about you at that time that took that information and insight and actually did something with it?
Yeah, I'm not sure at that point that it really sank that deep, because I also felt that, the whole system, I mean, imagine I was working for a large multinational with 420,000 people back then. I led large strategic projects, and I just, for my personal taste, I always felt there was too much hierarchy, too much things were too much inertia and moving too slowly. So my kind of conclusion was more that I need a different environment to thrive, more dynamic environment. That's why I eventually went to a private equity owned company with much more pace and drive that I felt more comfortable with. So I wouldn't say back then, I obviously took on the feedback, but it didn't really, I wasn't, it didn't sink as deep that I would really reflect on what should I adapt in my leadership style back then. So that required a few more learnings down the road to eventually come to that point that, hey, maybe there's a different angle to how you can all still be effective as a leader, but with slightly different approach to it.
And what I'm fascinated by is, obviously private equity is a very interesting sector to be in. And with someone like your personality and your drive and your, achievement orientation, competitiveness, again, there can be a tendency where they'll just give you so much rope. It's about then how you utilize that. So what was that like working in private equity? You would have got the right environment, but again, how did you protect yourself?
Yeah, I think it was really only when I started my own business, which, it's now 4 years ago, when I became much more mindful and attentive to also my mental health, because that's an environment where someone with my kind of traits or attitude or performance driven on outcome orientation can overly easily go into a burnout, which luckily still I haven't. Yeah. But I've applied techniques that allow me to actually prevent this from happening, or to really reduce it to a much bigger, it really reduce the likelihood that would occur. Back in private equity, it was, I could just easily go on and put in the hours and work late nights. I mean, I was in factories where we were testing the next generation of vending machines at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, because the machines had to get shipped the next day. So it was really I had so much energy, I could easily plow through this. And it wasn't like over an extended period that it would actually go into a burnout. So I think, it was less about me back then, more about making sure that, people I work with, that I didn't kind of bring them into an overdrive, if you will.
Sure. And what about on the personal side? I'm always fascinated when you're working in the private equity environment and your kind of personality. What happens then to those personal relationships, in terms of friends, family, those people that give you an outlet from all that work that you're doing?
Yeah, I still to this day have kept in contact with many colleagues, and I still look back with a big smile, because it was a really intense period. I was there for about 5 years. There was a lot of changes in the management, so a big tenure, basically almost entire management was moved out. So I persevered. I stayed in there until eventually, for me, it came the time to take the next step and move on and do something new and take on a new role and challenge. But it was, I really enjoyed working with the people there. The one thing that I found challenging was that it was a very short kind of a perspective on things. So even the project with a positive NPV, so net present value, so actually creating value for the company, they were not green lighted from the board, only because they didn't have a payback of 2 years. So that was something that I found at times difficult to convey that message to the team, basically saying, look, what we do actually creates value for the company, but we really have to optimize for short-term gains. And that was something that I just eventually realized that wouldn't necessarily well align with my values in terms of how I approach value creation within a company. But that was just basically inherent to that system, which was very much exit driven, and had a very short period when it comes to capital deployment or capital expenditure projects.
So up until this point, you'd worked in a large corporate environment, so where the environment we agree probably wasn't right for you in terms of your dynamism. You then went into an environment where it was, and then you were frustrated a little bit about the short-termism around the NPV, etc. So by the time you left there, after the 5 years and went on to the next stage of your career, what were you aware about at that point in terms of where your leadership strengths were and where you were still maybe limiting a little bit in terms of your leadership style?
Again, it's probably hard to think back where my brain was exactly 7 years ago, but I think I was very well aware that I could unite a team behind a bigger cause, behind a bigger purpose, really motivate the team to kind of excel and thrive. In terms of decision making, I believe I had a significant impact in helping the company really creating value and also contributing to back then, which was very important for the company, to building that IPO narrative. So I kind of really understood myself that I can exert some impact on a company level and take charge in leading large strategic initiatives. And as well as, report back to a board, work directly with the CEO, and kind of take on that responsibility.
And then on the limiting side, what were you aware of? And it may be nothing at this point because we become aware more at different times in our lives, but what were you aware of in terms of what you were doing to limit your leadership capability? Because we get in our own way sometimes of our leadership capability.
Yeah. Also, I think back then I was not as reflective or mindful as I would think of myself as of today. I think I was much more mindful and attentive to like protecting my team. Like, to give you a concrete example, we built a brand new factory in Russia, in St. Petersburg, and I was very much mindful about one of my employees that basically spent a lot of time there. I myself traveled probably around 32, 34 times forth and back within 18 months. So it was a very intense time, but he then at some point, he spent more time over there than I did. And there were some situations where Willie was concerned about his safety. And that was something that, I believe I was much more focused on actually making sure that my team is safe. That's one. And two, when I left, I wanted to make sure that everyone in my team is kind of well set up to also kind of pursue the next path or pursue their path without me being there, to kind of just set things up in a way that would kind of open up the path for them to kind of then grow and kind of progress. And I was very happy to hear that one of my employees eventually later on took on my role. So he really progressed and kind of grew.
And 7 years ago, when you were having this kind of experience towards the end of your time there, did you think at that point that you would set up your own business in the future, or was it something that wasn't on the radar then?
It was actually on the radar even earlier. When I worked for big tech, I had a big tech company, probably 7 years ago, so probably 14 years back from today. I've just felt this fire that I want to create something on my own. And that was something that always was present, but the pull was maybe not as strong, and there was also no push. So I always, was fortunate enough to have been approached by executive boutiques, executive firms that would then present me another, fantastic opportunity. And I always felt very compelled by the opportunity to learn something else. So my next role was actually as a CMO and Chief Product Officer and Digital Innovation Officer. I was really, really attracted by the opportunity to transform a business, to help transform a business from a box moving company, very much machine manufacturer, towards a solution service company, with the help, among other things, of launching an innovative B2B SaaS product. So again, the opportunity to do something new through innovation, creating customer value and business value. That was something that really compelled me and drove me. And I thought, okay, I want to do that experience before I then start something on my own.
And then this is really interesting for the audience, because there's probably many people out there that have that fire still. It's maybe been burning, 10, 15 years as it was for you. So just talk to us a little bit about that catalyst, that final piece that you thought, this is the right time right now. It's always been there for me, but this is the right time for me to start. Because it's still a risk, no matter how we start a business. There's always a risk, no matter how much investment's around. So just talk to us about that catalyst, that inflection point.
Yeah, I think it was a process rather than just an inflection point, right? So,
Okay.
and the two, if you will, guiding principles that really helped me to be crystal clear on how to take a decision, or what would eventually convince me to, to really go out and do it, start on my own, was two things. One was an executive MBA program about entrepreneurship from really an impressive professor at INSEAD. He basically told me really to mitigate the risk as much as I can up front, or to put it differently, to try to kill my idea before I get too much invested. That's one. And two was from actually Jeff Bezos to the risk omission, reducing the what was it called? So somehow basically reducing the omission risk. So I fast forward and thought of what would be my biggest regret if I was 80. And for me, it was crystal clear, if I never would have trusted myself to start something on my own, that would be one of my biggest regrets. That I would not want to be the person at 80 to have that big regret. So I knew I want this, and then what also helped was the kind of realization that the ambition I have for the company that I last worked for, this large global professional coffee machine manufacturer. I knew that basically had bigger ambition for a company, what we could do with digitization. I just felt that the culture and the mindset was not there to actually make it really happen. So that eventually also helped me. That was kind of a little bit of a push, and combined with that pull. And then the risk mitigation strategy was really to actually start building it on the side. So I started way earlier before I made the shift. So I started getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, working on a project, working on weekends, doing vacation, just kind of building it up as a side gig. And once I knew that, okay, now, just to give it a chance to eventually take off, I have to get in full time. And that was when I then came in or moved on full time in summer 2020.
Super. And I guess the next question for me, which I'm really curious about, is up until 2020, I get this feeling and this message that actually you've been working really hard. You're very competitive. You want to be the best you can be. You want to achieve. You've had those opportunities. And now you set your own business up. And what you've said to us is that it's only recently that you've actually started to create some space for, mindfulness, for actually reflection. So what's been the reasoning behind that? Why now?
I think for me, and obviously every startup journey is different. I'm also mentoring and coaching other startup founders because I really care about paying it forward and sharing my experience. And if there's startup founders, I can help them at least, slightly to improve the chances for success and the chances for not running into burnout. Then, I'm very happy if I can be of service in that regard. So for me, it was, in my journey, which was building basically a highly scalable digital platform with ambition to be the world leading platforming, helping musicians to make a fair living and connecting, ambitious music learners with qualified instructors. That's something where you need venture capital. You need outside in money. We started off bootstrapping, first my own money, then I brought in a co-founder who also invested himself. So that helped us for the first 18 months to basically just finance the operations. But then we needed to convince investors that that's actually a good idea with an attractive upside potential. And fundraising is something that it's not only something that is within your own circle of influence. It also is very much dependent on macroeconomics. The overall investor sentiment, which dramatically changed in 2023 compared to 2021. And that's something that is very energy draining. You basically, if you approach it like a marketing funnel, you have to do so many more pitches, and eventually you can convince investors. So you actually get a lot of rejections, more rejections than acceptance or support. And for me, the tool was basically meditation. I started to I was always very keen on installing rituals, but now was even more important than ever to have my rituals in the morning, kind of a strong morning ritual, and evening ritual, just to kind of basically stay sane. So really have my foundation, know my strength, and also have my space to mentally prepare myself for the day. And so that's where I became much more interested in personal growth, in personal development, like more from a mindset perspective rather than just from a pure career perspective. And that to me was really kind of necessary, a strong necessity to actually navigate through that roller coaster of starting your own startup and raising funds and round after round. And it's such a fragile plant, if you will, that really have to be able to navigate through a lot of uncertainties. And having a family obviously just puts, just adds the burden, if you will, because it's not about you, it's about, decisions you take as a lifestyle, as a career choice affects, in my case, 3 other individuals. So that's something that me as a person, I don't take that lightly. I take this with with some sense of responsibility.
Thank you for sharing that. And the next question that comes to me is, if you had the ability to go back to a past version of yourself in any of those environments you've talked about, to be able to share the wisdom of meditation and what it provides, would you choose to go back and impart that, or just leave it as it was?
Yeah, I always, I've always asked myself, like, you probably know these games, right? These simulation games, strategy games. You could just kind of go back and do it better and better.
Yeah.
So I would say, there's some trade of trying to always kind of do the best and kind of have a certain attitude for perfectionism. I've had this inclination to kind of go back and change things, but now I'm really convinced that the learnings you do through life are for a reason. And if it was not through learnings and also setbacks, you wouldn't be where you are today. So through the course of my now 45 years, I've actually really started to be really grateful for the challenges and setbacks, even more than for the successes, because I believe they've shaped me much more than successes. Successes were kind of, really just kind of feeding my ego, but the challenges were helping me to grow my personality. And so to answer the question, I would say no, I wouldn't want to change anything, because I don't believe I would be where I am today if I took different choices in my past.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. So what I'm interested in now is the future for you. You've explained a little bit about what you're doing, but just tell us a little bit about what's the dream for you in terms of the business you've created and why you're there and what you want to see happen in the world because of what you're doing as an organization. Just tell us a bit more about that.
Right. So the mission we pursue with Matchspace Music is really to make music much more like easy accessible to everyone who wants to get started. So that's our mission. So it's a very purpose-driven company. We really want to bring more music into the world. That's one. And two, we also want to help the musicians, music teachers to make a fair living by make it easier for them to find more students to that they can teach and also take care of all the admin stuff. So that's really the mission purpose that we pursue with Matchspace Music. As a founder and CEO of the company, I also have the ambition to build a company that allows people to really thrive. You wouldn't believe the many people that I've interviewed for the role of a co-founder. With around 145 people I interviewed for that role. For the CPO, I interviewed around 94 people. And there were probably 2 out of 3, if not 3 out of 4 people, very strong candidates that were completely frustrated, but just because the way they're currently operating in their environment, which was not enabling them, allowing them to really thrive, to really kind of, fully, basically get their best out of as a person, but be very much constrained about political environment, about, their superior that would not really allow them to shine or, take some risks or have certain freedom to innovate. So that really, was shocking for me to see how many great talents are frustrated in their current day-to-day job, but also driven by a lot of fear, not trusting that they actually, can decide to start something else tomorrow. And I can very much, relate to that, because it was not an easy choice for myself. Being a successful C-level executive with a lot of, nice lifestyle. If you start your own business, it comes with a lot of uncertainties. You have to do a lot of cutbacks financially. So it's not an easy choice. So I can certainly relate to, that some people kind of feel very much like golden handcuffs, caught in their current environment. So that's why I do want to create not just a great business to help teachers to also fair living and help many more people in the world to play music, but also to create a company where people can thrive.
Thank you. And it's really interesting when, probably like you, when I work with people who are thinking about founding a business, and one of the big barriers is this perceived, am I going to be able to earn a living, or the living that I need to be able to look after my family, etc. And when we really think about it, it's usually a lot less that we need than we really think we do, because we've been used to the trappings of the salaries, etc. And I think really thinking about that deeply is something that's useful for people. So I've got one last question for you, which links to that, and then obviously happy for anything else you want to share. But if you were giving some advice to somebody out there now who has had that fire for a long time, there's maybe fear and anxiety about following their dream, they know exactly what it is, they had the clarity that you had, what maybe advice would you give to them in terms of the next step to take to maybe move closer to living that life?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that come to mind. I mean, one thing would be, and that is something I also try to convey with any startup founder that I share my experience or help them along their journeys, to never compare yourself to anyone else. There's no other journey like your own. There's no other background like your own. There's no other, like, you're as unique as an individual, and therefore never ever compare yourself to someone else. So that's one. So with that along, really be in touch with your authentic self, understanding what you really want in life, and be kind of honor that. There's a reason why you feel the way you feel, and if you really feel you want to do something different, then it's worthwhile listen to that very carefully. If there is fear, then there's probably fear for reasons. Also, ignoring fear probably doesn't help, because it will just come back and probably more fearful. So respect the fear, acknowledge the fear, understand where the fear comes from. Maybe that's even a nugget for some insights in terms of better understanding yourself. And then trust in life. My experience is that life works for you, not against you. Challenges or setbacks may actually be a blessing. And there's much more revolving doors than one-way doors. That's also from Jeff Bezos, kind of the two-way door decisions. There's many more decisions where you can basically revert or go back than you think. And nobody can take away from what you've did. So even if you think like, what will people think of me if it's not a success? How do you define success? Quite often the experience you gain, the learnings you make are so much more valuable than any outcome. And you never know what's around the corner. When one door closes, usually one, if not more, doors open. So, believe in life working for you and approaching like, what you want to get out of life in this one lifetime, and then take the leap of faith.
Patrick,
if the timing's right for you. Yeah,
absolutely.
For me, it was a process to find the timing that was right. And that's, again, very individual.
No, absolutely. And people will know that. So I really appreciate all your thoughts that you've shared today. And I'm sure the audience out there that have been listening to this and watching this as well have taken something away, and hopefully have a choice in their lives about when they follow this passion, this dream, with the support of others around them. So Patrick, thanks again for being on the show today.
Thank you, Andrew, for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Tallents into LinkedIn or your favorite browser, and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.